Hey guys, I'm Brittany Gans at the Gans Group. I'm a licensed realtor here in Houston, Texas, and today I want to talk to you about writing a 1 to 4 family contract. So I was sitting at a barbecue this weekend with my little cousin's birthday, and everyone that I meet, everybody always says, oh yeah, I want to get into real estate. I wanted to get into real estate. Trust me, it's a highly glamorized, profession on social media. But what I learned from that conversation was that most people don't know how to even write a 1 to 4 family contract. Now, I am a licensed realtor here in Houston, Texas. I've been licensed for about 6 years. I've won awards. My first year I made 6 figures. So I feel like I'm more than qualified to, tell somebody how to write a 1 to 4. I had a team and all that good stuff. So stay tuned, watch this video if you're curious about how to write a 1 to 4. Quick disclaimer, I am a licensed realtor. I am not a professional attorney. I am only doing this from my experience and how I write contracts. Please, please, please make sure that you read the actual contract, because that's the only way that you're truly going to learn what the contract is saying, right? You need to know these things. So the way I learned was I had a broker at the time and told me just read the contract. I sat there and read the contract till I got tired of looking at it, till it made my head hurt, and I would do it again the next day. Then I started to understand what it was saying, right? And then I was able to fully explain that to a client that I was writing the offer for. So, take your time, read this, go through it, but I'm going to show you a way that I fill out the contract, okay? So without further ado, let's write this offer and let's make some money in the next 30 to 60 days.
You're for the man.
So this is a 1 to 4 family residential contract. It basically means what it says. You can use this document for any 1 to 4 families. So multifamilies, you got 2 doors, 3 doors, or quadplexes that have 4 doors. You can use this contract. Now, this is a Texas contract and it's promulgated. So what does promulgated mean? It means that Texas, the Real Estate Commission, has already went out and sought after attorneys that have already pre-drafted these documents or contracts. So if there's a document in promulgated form, you want to use it, okay? So here I use the system Dotloop, and if you're with the Association of Realtors of Houston, Association of Realtors, then you'll be able to have access to Dotloop. I like it because it lets me autofill a lot of these populated fields that would manually have me type it in. So like if I put the address in, the address is going to pop up everywhere in this contract and I don't have to completely fill it out. So without further ado, I'm going to show you my process and how I speed through the contract. And as you can see, here's the contract. It's an 11-page document. And so it's taking a while to load, but it's okay. So let's autofill. All right. So as you can see here, I have the buyers here and I'm going to add a person because they're not in the system yet. So we'll say my buyer's name is Elon Musk. Let's speak it into existence. So I am going to add Elon Musk's, my client's email address here. And then I have to also make sure that I have his role assigned as the buyer. And I'm going to hit add person. Now you have an option if there's more than one buyer to add them here. But the next thing I need to do is add a seller in here. And if I'm representing the buyer, how do I even know, who the seller actually is? And I'm going to show you how I get that information for you. So if I click here, scroll down, it'll also allow me to add another person. But let's go on over to Matrix, the MLS, and I'm going to show you how I pull the seller's information. So what I'm going to do now is just log on to HAR, Houston Association of Realtors. That is my board of realtors. And I'm going to log into my members only profile. And I'm going to access the MLS, which is Access Matrix. The next thing I'm going to do is go ahead and pull up the property address in which my client likes and wants to make an offer on. So for training purposes, let's just use a listing that I currently have. It's under contract now, but let's just go ahead and use it. Okay. And I'm going to search it here. And here it is. Here's the listing. So how do I get the seller's information, right? So the first thing I'm going to do is just click on this TX button. This is the realist tax. You can get to this numerous ways. You can also come here and go to realist tax and type it in. But since the listing is on the MLS, all I have to do is click this one button and it'll take me directly to the realist tax or tax record for this particular property. So a tax record will pretty much tell you who's the owner, legal descriptions of the house, taxes that are paid. So once I get into the tax record, I can actually see that this is a 4-bedroom, 3.5 bath, prices and all that good stuff. I can see the owners of the property, right? And that's what I want because those are my sellers. And then I also can scroll down and see the legal description, which we're going to use next. So what I'm going to do is pretend that the owner is a different name, and we're just going to go with a totally different name. Okay. So now let's add that seller's name into Dotloop under the seller name or seller one field. So here I'm going to add the seller name, and let's pretend the seller's name is Tesla Musk. Okay. And then we're going to make sure, well, we don't need to add their email because we're not representing the seller and there's nothing that we need to send them. So what we do need to make sure of is that the role does say seller. So that's already selected, and I'm going to add the person. Now I'm also going to fill out the buyer's agent. And in this case, the buyer's agent is me. And I'm also going to fill out the listing agent. Now for training purposes, let's add another person and pretend that the listing agent is not me because this is my listing that I have. Right? So what I would do is to find any information on the listing agent, I'll just go back into Matrix and I'll find exactly who the listing agent is. So let's do that. So as you can see here, this is the listing, and all I have to do to find the listing agent is find this information, and it says listing agent here. Then you also have the listing agent's broker information, which we're going to use later. So if I click here, you'll be able to see the listing agent's name, phone numbers, email addresses, license numbers, managing supervisors, all that good stuff here. So let's add the listing agent into Dotloop. So since I am the listing agent, I'm going to go ahead and just add my information in. So that way we can populate the listing agent information. So let's go ahead and type in the full name area. I'm also going to make sure that I add the email address and make sure that the role is titled listing agent. I'm going to click done, and we're going to move on to the actual we actually don't need to fill out the title person because Dotloop won't register it. So we're going to fill out the buying broker, which is my broker, right? If I'm representing the buyer, which is eXp Realty, and I learned that from Matrix. Then I'm also going to fill out the listing broker as well. Let's pretend that this listing broker was different. I'll just get it from the same information on Matrix. And what I'm going to do is fill in the property address here. Normally I can put it in and it'll search it and automatically generate the information from the listing. But in this case, it wasn't finding it today. So what I had to do is just go ahead and manually type it in at the bottom. So I put the street number where it asked me to add the street number, which is 4615. And then we're going to add the street name, which is Cedar Butte. And then we're going to add the state, Texas. Okay. Now, earnest money is typically just 1% of whatever the purchase price is. So let's break that down on this house. So the listing price on this house is $430,000. And let's say we're making a full offer. So if I wanted to take 1% of 430, I'm going to say times 0.01 in decimals, which is the same thing as 1%. And I'm going to equal that out. And my earnest money is going to be $4,300. So now that I've calculated out my earnest money, what I'm going to do is add it here in the auto populated field. I'm going to put 4,300 here, but I'm also going to make it look nice. I'm going to add my commas and my zeros to it as well. The next thing that I'm going to do is add my closing date. And since we're sitting at this video, I'm recording it on June 12th. I want to go a month out. So I'm going to make the closing date July 12th. Well, I'm sorry. Let's do this. Let's add a couple more days in there for negotiations. So instead of 7/12, let's go ahead and add it and make it 7/14. That way, if we need to negotiate for 2 days, because sometimes it does take 2 days, then we have our time. Now, the geographic description is basically just your legal description that you grab from the realist tax. So while we're here, I'm going to show you how to get that. So let's migrate back over to Matrix into realist tax. So I always leave this open in the background because I know I'm going to need it again, right? I'm going to need it for several things. The legal description and to see what taxes are being paid, because if they are in a MUD tax, then I need that document that says they're in a municipal utility district, which means that they have to pay a water tax. Okay, so right here we're looking for a legal description, and I have found it under the tax information tab. Here's my legal description. This is my neighborhood name, right? And then here goes my block and my lot number. So it's block 1, lot 69. So what I'm going to do is copy the neighborhood code, right? I'm going to copy it so that way I can go back and paste it. And then all I have to remember is block 1 and lot 69. So let's go and add it to our Dotloop form. So I'm going to add lot 1, block 69, and I'm going to paste my subdivision information because this is where the legal description is telling me to do. So now what I'm going to do is hit the autofill button. That way it'll autofill this whole entire document. All right, and check it out. We have our seller here. We have our buyer here. We also have our legal description under the property information of property. Okay, so let's go through the document and let's talk about what everything means. This part of the contract is very important because it talks about anything that could be attached to the home. For instance, you have blinds, windows, shades, draperies. If it is attached to the home, then we need to know what the seller wants to take with them. Normally it's listed on MLS. If it's not listed there, then there's really nothing there. But let's say that the seller listed on the MLS that they wanted to take their blinds. So what I'm going to put here is the exclusion, because what we would hate to have is to get to closing and to see that the seller took the blinds, and now our buyer is moving in without any blinds, and it's a big old deal, and then you have to give up some of your commission, right? So here I'm going to put the exclusion for blinds. So seller to keep blinds. Well, actually, I want to change this. I'm going to put it to be blinds to be excluded from the sale of the property. Make it a little bit more professional. Okay. Now let's move on to the remaining of the contract so we can know how to write it. So here's the most important part of the contract. One of the most important parts is the sales price. A lot of realtors get confused on this, but Dotloop has made it really easy for us because it breaks down. It only lets you fill out 2 fields instead of like originally it used to fill out 3 fields. So at the top on the A part, well, let's explain this. This is these different boxes here represent which type of financing it's going to be. It's either going to be third-party financing, either they're getting a loan assumption, they're taking over the seller's loan, or seller financing, which is owner financing. Now, in this case, my client has a loan. So her loan is an FHA loan, which makes it a minimum of 3.5% for down payment. So I went to the handy dandy calculator and I calculated 3.5% of 430 and it gave me $15,000. I checked the box because she is getting the FHA loan from a lender. And then the remaining part of this is just $430,000 minus the down payment. And that is the part that the client is going to finance. So 430,000 minus 15,050 is where I'm going to populate this number. So let me show you in the calculator what I did. Okay, so I have 430,000. So let me type that in. And then I'm going to take away the 15,050, right? And that is going to give me my loan number that the client has financed. So it's just less the down payment of the total purchase price that we're offering. Now, keep in mind, we can offer more, we can offer less. This is just what the client wanted to do after we talked to them and we showed them a CMA. And let's go ahead and populate this number into the right field. Okay, now that we have our number populated, what's going to end up happening is it's going to populate the total amount for us, which is 430. And yeah, it looks like we did our numbers right. So let's move on to the remaining part of the contract, which is leases. Now, a residential lease is basically when a seller is basically going to lease the house back after they close on the house from the buyer. So they're going to live in it and then they're going to pay the buyer rent. So a fixtures lease is any fixtures on a property, meaning any kind of water treatment systems that are in the house that are being leased, security systems, all that good stuff can be leased and transferred to the new buyer. And then a natural resource lease is anything that's a natural resource, meaning gas, oil, or anything that has been leased, which may transfer over to the seller. Now, most of the time, you're only going to really fill out the residential leases, but in this case, we don't have any leases. So we're going to continue forward with the entire contract of moving on towards the earnest money. All right, so we're talking about earnest money now. You see how it auto-populated the 4,300. So what next I need to do is add the title company information into the right field. So typically the title company information is held with the listing agent. So what I normally do is just text the listing agent what's the title company that your seller would like to choose, because whoever pays for the title policy or commitment is going to be the one that chooses the title company. Major alert, major plug there, something that I didn't know when I first started. So now I'm going to put the address of the actual title company. And let's use some nice angel numbers here. All right. And this is just a mock. It's nothing real. Now this is the address. And then this field right here is basically asking for option fees. These are very important because this is a 7 to 10 day period and when the buyer can back out. Just in case the inspection doesn't check out or whatnot, or if they got cold feet, or if they want to move forward with another home. So typically option money is anywhere from $150 to $250, depending on the price of the home. Now, when you get into luxury homes, earnest money can be a little bit more expensive, like $1,000, $2,000, $5,000. It really just depends on the price of the home. But since this is under $500,000, our max we're going to do is about $250. Okay. And then this next field asks if our buyer is going to deliver any additional earnest money, and that's not going to happen because there's no reason to. And then we're going to move over to the termination of the option period. And this is how many days you want in the option period. Now, typically the option period can be 3, 5, 7, 10 days, or you can elect not to have one. Now, since we're paying $250, I'm going to see if I can get the max number of days for my client. I'm going to get 10 days. That's enough time to get an inspection report, review it, and negotiate. Now, number 6 is telling me the title policy information, which is just the insurance on the title policy to transfer over a clean title. Now, typically the seller pays for this as a traditional seller's cost, but a buyer can pay for it. So if we were in a multiple offer situation, what I would ask, is see if my buyer wanted to pay for it, because these title policies are not cheap. They're 1%, which is the same amount as your earnest money. So think about it. If a buyer is already bringing $15,000 for down payment, and they're also bringing another 4.5% for closing costs, which is almost another $20,000, then why would I have my buyer pay another $4,000 without telling them, right? Now, I only do this in multiple offer situations. There's no offers on the table, or if there's 1 or 2 offers, then I'm gonna mark it as a seller cost. So I'm going to put the same title company information here, as you can see, Chicago Title. Okay. And it's also talking about the survey in this field. So the next fill-in blanks are pretty much to ask about what should be amended or deleted from the title policy or any shortages in the area. So normally this area right here depends on the house. If it's a normal residential house, I'm going to say, will not be amended or deleted because there's been no changes to the house. There's nothing crazy going on. But if it's a very unique property, then I'm going to say will be amended to read shortages in the area at the expense of either the buyer or seller, just depending on how many offers may be on the table. So for this training purposes, what I'm going to do is a 2021 house. It's fairly new. It's 2023 right now. I'm going to go ahead and mark that it would not be amended or deleted from the title policy because I don't think there should be much going on, but hey, who knows, right? So the next section talks about commitments in the title commitment, which is just details on what's going on under the person, if there's any liens, encumbrances, judgments against the person. Then we're talking about surveys here. Now, typically the seller may have a survey. And sometimes in the MLS, the listing agent will note whether the seller has a survey or not. So what I normally like to do is just check the first box because it says within a certain amount of days that the seller is going to provide one, right? So I like to give the seller 14 days, right? Because sometimes they got to order it. It can take some time. Now, it also says if the seller fails to furnish the existing survey affidavit in the time prescribed, the buyer shall obtain a new survey at seller's expense no later than 3 days prior to closing. So if the title company rejects the survey, normally they'll reject it if it's 10 years old or older, if they're 10 years old or older, or if there's been any structural changes to the house. Maybe they added a pool, maybe they added a living room to the back room as a structural change. Now, if none of this stuff has been done in the house and it's a normal residential house, then I'm going to go ahead and say the buyer's expense. Let the buyer pay for it because honestly, I don't think that is going to be rejected. But if it's something crazy going on, I'm going to put seller's expense. And it really depends on how many offers are on the table. If there's 1 or 2 offers, I may do sellers. If there's 3 to 4 or 5 offers, I may do buyers. I may just have the buyer pay for it up front, which is what number 2 is as basically saying. Within a certain amount of days of the contract of the effective date, the buyer shall obtain a new survey at the buyer's expense. Of course, surveys are like $400, $800. It just depends on the property and the surveyor. Then the last one basically discloses that the seller's going to pay for it up front and there's no issues going forward. So if you're trying to be competitive, really honestly, and there's 5 hours on the table, go ahead and just let your buyer know to pay for the survey if they don't have one, right? You can always ask the listing agent if they have one, so that's the survey part of it. And the next field we're going to talk about is going to be the objections. So the buyer on letter D may be able to object to some of the defects, exceptions, or encumbrances to title. And what we want to do is give our buyer some time to get out of the contract because they object to some of the things that came back. So what I'm going to put here is just residential single family dwelling. If this was a 2-unit or 4-unit, I'm going to put residential multifamily dwelling. And then I'm going to give it about 5 days. Normally you'll see 3 to 5 days here, but I'm gonna go for the max, of course. Now it's asking me, is the property in a HOA? Yes, I'm gonna go and check real quick on the MLS and I'm gonna show you how I look for that. So here, this is how I figure out if the property is in a HOA, a homeowners association. So what I'm going to do is go into the MLS, and I left it open for me because I know I have to come back, and I'm going to scroll down to see if there's any maintenance fees. Yes, there are any maintenance fees, and it also tells me the management company of the HOA. So I know there's HOA fees, so I know it's in the HOA. So I'm going to go back to Dotloop and I'm going to populate that field that it is in the HOA. Now, if there was nothing here and there's $0, then that means there's no HOA. So let's populate the button that it is in the HOA. All right, and let's move forward with the contract and see what else we got to fill out, because most of this is going to be legal jargon. You really want to look in for the fill-in parts, but you want to make sure you understand tidewaters, annexations, whether the property is located in the service area, public improvement, transfer fees, propane gas, all that other stuff. You want to make sure you know these contracts just in case you run into an event to where there is a transfer fee. That way you'll know exactly what it's talking about. Now, number 11 basically is new. It's basically saying required notices. So it's a MUD document, a WC ID, or PID. And so these are extra documents that could be promulgated. So I know for sure the MUD document is the municipal utility district. And the way I can check if the house is in a MUD district is by checking the taxes. So I'm going to populate MUD here because I already know that it's there. But let me show you how to populate the taxes or look for what tax it is. So this is the tax record again. I'm going to come back to it. And then I'm going to go look at my actual tax assessments for the year, right? Assessment and taxes. If I start here, you can see it here. But I really want to look at the jurisdiction. And it's telling me these are all the taxes that they're paying on a house. And then I see a Brazoria County MUD. So yes, it's in a MUD district. So I need to add that document. All right, let's scroll down to the seller's disclosure notice. So pretty much the seller's disclosure notice is basically, if a seller's disclosure notice needs to be filled out every time. The way I can check to see if it's online is to go back into Matrix and look at these documents right here. So let me show you real quick. So I'm back in Matrix again, and I look at the documents right here, and it takes me to attachments, or I can view the documents here. There's a number of ways you can get to it, but I prefer to click on the picture. So if I click on the picture, it'll tell me exactly what documents have been listed. So I see the seller's disclosure notice is here. I'm going to click on it and then I'm going to download it. So here is the seller's disclosure notice already filled out by the seller. And then I need to review it before I send it over for my buyer to sign. And they also need to review it to see if there's any kind of flood that it could be zoned in, or, just any defects on the home. So since the SD is what we like to call it is online, I'm going to say that my buyer my buyer actually has the seller's disclosure notice. Okay. And then I do have the option to say, hey, buyer has not received the notice. Please give it to us within a certain amount of days. Now, typically we want these days to be within the option period so that they have time enough to terminate out of the contract. So normally I like to put about 3 days there. Okay, and then the other one, it says that the seller doesn't need to require this to do one. Normally this is a new home and it doesn't need it, or maybe a tax bank-owned property. Okay, let's keep going forward in the contract. All right, so here we're on number 3. Under D, we have whether the buyer accepts the property as is. And this is normally what we choose because we don't want to go in asking for repairs without having an inspection report, especially if there's multiple offers on the table. So the second option basically says buyer accepts the property as is, but wants the seller to complete certain repairs. So if we know there's roof conditions or roof problems, we might see that up front when we go see the property, but we don't want to go in asking for it, right? Because they may not choose our offer. We may not have the opportunity to buy the house. So normally all sales are normally as is, but your option period will protect your client to be able to terminate out of the contract. Now here's more legal jargon. Here is the residential service contract, which is basically a contract that the seller can pay for the buyer to have a home warranty. A home warranty protects your appliances, some components of your AC and plumbing and electrical. We can have the seller pay for this for the buyer. So typically you're about $650 for the max plan, and it just depends on what plan you want because they're all tiered. So normally I put about $550 or $595 here for my buyer. Now, in the event that the seller was going to pay less, let's say the seller was going to pay about $300 for the home warranty, then my buyer can pay the remaining at closing, which is only $300. So whatever the seller credits here is absolutely fine. Even if they give $100, that means my client only has to bring the remainder amount. Okay. So, let's move forward to the brokers and sales agent, which this portion on number 8 is basically just disclosing that if I had any stake in this deal, so say I was selling it for a family member, or I owned the home with someone else, or maybe it's my house that I'm selling, I need to disclose that in this contract so that way the other agent knows who they're negotiating with. Okay? Very important to disclose. In this case, no one is family members, or we're only representing the clients. So we're going to move forward to number 9. And as you can see, our date is auto-populated in from our autofill. So it's really nice. We have it closing on the 14th in a month, in a couple of days. Now, the next session is basically talking about possession. So when will the buyer move in? So pretty much you always want the buyer to move in upon closing and funding, which means that they don't get keys until that money comes through to the seller, right? Now you do have an option here to say it's according to the temporary residential lease, and that is basically if the seller is going to live in the house as a lease back after they close and pay rent to the buyer. In this case, there's no seller's lease back. Typically, the listing agent will let you know if there is one, okay, if the seller needs more time to get out the house. In this case, we're going to close up on funding. Okay, so this next section talks about special provisions. Now, you don't want to use this section for anything that there is a promulgated form for. So be careful what you put here, because it only needs to be a factual information that you do not have a promulgated form for. Okay, so be very careful here. Now, let's talk about the settlement and other expenses. This section right here has a fill-in part on number B, which is allowing the seller to pay a portion of the buyer's closing costs. So we always try to negotiate something from the seller to get my clients in this market, because it does help with buy downs on your interest rates. So I'm going to say, hey, let's ask for $5,000 and see what they say. Now you need to talk to your lender and your buyer on this one, because some buyers may actually have to have closing costs in order to buy the house. But in this case, this buyer didn't, and I'm just trying to do a favor for them to get them some money out of their, out of the deal. So since they're offering full price. Keep in mind, I'm only doing this because there's no offers on the table. If there are offers on the table, then we have to be more competitive with asking for closing costs. Okay, so just keep in mind, if there's multiple offers, you may not be able to ask for this. If there's only one offer, then yeah, you may be able to get some closing costs off the seller. It could be any amount. FHA allows you to go up to 6%, whereas a conventional loan only allows you to ask for 3%. So 3% of 400,000 is like 12. So we're not asking for the full. So let's move on. This rest of the contract is a lot of legal jargon. Make sure you know prorations of taxes, any casualty losses that may happen, any defaults, mediation, or attorney fees, or escrow problems. Make sure you read this, know this, okay? That way, if you have any issues, you'll know. Now, number 21 is basically saying where to reach the buyer. So you always want to fill in this information. I may not have the address right now, but I do have their phone number and their email address. So that means that the title company can always call the buyer or email the buyer and get in touch with them if they need anything, if they need an emergency, right? If they need anything that's urgent. Okay, and then I can do this. The seller can do the same thing once they get the contract. And I'm going to fill my information in too, because if there's an emergency on the deal or something's urgent, I want to know about it. And if there's a way I can resolve it, I will. So I'm going to fill in my email address. And then here are all the other documents to the actual contract, right? So if there is a third-party financing addendum that's needed, seller financing addendum, all these other documents are promulgated forms that are provided by the Texas Real Estate Commission, right? Or the Association of Realtors, Texas Association of Realtors. So I already know that this person is getting a loan, so I'm going to add that. We already know that the property is in a mandatory membership or HOA. And then I'm going to look here. There's no other lease backs going on. There's no oil. There's nothing special assessments here. I'm going to look to see if there's anything else that I need, which I don't think, because it's really a straightforward deal, a straightforward home purchase. Okay. And I would drop the next video on how to do a third-party financing addendum and an HOA doc. I'll drop that video coming soon, so don't worry. Okay. Let's move on to the rest of the contract. So typically, you do not need an attorney in the state of Texas on number 23. Some people choose to hire one, but I mean, hey, you don't need one because each title company has their own attorney that does the documents for them at closing. If your buyer wants one, they can spend money on it, but it is a waste of money. But hey, it's their prerogative at the end of the day. This part of the contract is the execution of the contract. This is once buyer and seller sign the contract and it starts the 30-day process. Everything in real estate is very timely and based off these dates. This is where the people sign it, the buyer and seller. And here's my favorite part that I love filling out. I'm just kidding. I hate filling this out. But this is basically just my information or buyer's information and also seller's information. Seller's listing agent information. So this deal, let's pretend that I'm not the agent on both, and I'm going to mark buyer agent for a buyer and seller agent only as a selling agent. I'm going to put the license number for the brokerage. And then I'm also going to put my license number. I have my own team, so I'm going to put my team name there. My email address is there. And then I'm going to populate my license supervisor. Okay. And I'm going to put his license number there. Since I'm with EXP, I'm not going to put a phone number because it's not that important. With EXP, they already have my phone number if they need it. Oh, well, let's just put one in there. Let's just put a generic one, because what if you're not with the EXP? Now, let's pretend that I wasn't, representing both sides. I would have to do the same thing on this end. And let me show you where I'm getting all this information from. So this information is coming from these two tabs. If I need to get the brokerage information from the listing agent, because I already know mine is a buyer agent, right? I should. If I don't, I can look on my IABS and find the broker's license number. But I'm going to click here, and it's going to show me everything I need to know about the brokerage. It's also going to tell me who the license supervisor is, which is the office manager. It's also going to tell me the broker's license, right? And then it's going to tell me the supervisor's license number. So I have the phone number. I have everything I need to fill out that section of the contract. Okay, and let's just assume that this is an intermediary deal. Really, how I'm presenting to you, it is, but technically we're pretending that the listing agent and the buyer's agent is different. I'm going to go ahead here and fill this out as if there was another agent, the seller agent there, because when you write the offer, you want to do most of the work for the listing agent. I mean, you could leave this blank, but let's just go ahead and fill it out. It shows that you're competent and you know what you're doing. Now, I'm going to get all this information from Matrix, okay? And I'm just copying and I'm pasting, right? Now, I had to top that in there. And then I'm going to continue to copy and paste the license supervisor's information. And we're pretending that this is totally different, okay, guys? We're just pretending. So I'm going to go ahead and just paste in all the information that I need. Okay, now let's pretend that I am the listing agent and the buyer's agent. What I'll do is I'll check this box that says buyer and seller as intermediary, and that's what intermediary means. And then if I appoint another agent here to represent the seller and I represent the buyer or vice versa, I'm going to fill it out here. The most important part of the contract is that you want to get paid, okay? So don't forget at the bottom of this contract to fill in your commission from the MLS. Typically, commissions are 3%. You can find this at the bottom of the matrix of the MLS. And typically, this one is paying is 3%. So I'm going to fill in 3% because I do want to get paid, okay? So let's continue. We're at the end of the contract. This is just receipts right here. So once the title company receives the option money and the earnest money from the buyer, they're going to provide a receipt, and they need to do so within 3 business days. The buyer needs to submit money within 3 business days in the state of Texas, or your seller can terminate. All right, I hope this was very helpful. That's an 11-page document for you. Please review it and make sure you read over the contracts. And thanks for tuning in. We love you at the Gantz Group, and we hope that you tune in to more of our educational videos. Let's get you to writing offers, closing deals, and making money.